Sorry, my name is Todd Lynch. I'm a lecturer in the department here, focusing on professional practice and construction and also licensure. So I'm officially the licensing advisor for the campus. So if you have any questions about the kinds of topics we're going to talk about, I'm on call and available to help you with those as you go through the program here, and also as you move ahead and graduate and start into your career. I do a lot of conversations with emerging professionals afterward as well. So today I'm going to be focusing on the different elements of the path to architectural licensure, how we get there, and then there are kind of different variations that may apply more or less to you, but all of the different steps are things that will apply in general. And then we're going to I'll also say a little bit more about kind of resources and career-oriented aspects of things that you can look for in the quarter to come. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Change that format. Okay, here we go. So, so this is a presentation about the journey that we're all taking as we train to become architects. Being an architect is a licensed profession, and it requires a lot of specific training, which includes this degree. It also includes the experience you get out in the field, and it includes sort of testing and credentialing. And so all of those things are part of what it takes to get there from here. So I like to say sometimes that this pathway is a combination of education, experience, and then the examination. These are the things that you have to overcome in order to become licensed. And all of them here start with A's, which is a great thing to get in graduate and architecture school. Basically AUD for your education, the AXP for your architectural experience, and then the architect director's examination as the proof that you have acquired that knowledge. So all those things together inform your record for Ncarb, which is the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. Every state in the country has an architect registration board, which is tasked with approving candidates in their jurisdiction. So the rules are a little different from state to state, but Ncarb is a national group that all of those boards send a representative to, and they make sure that the standards are consistent across the US. And that standard has also started to become applied to other international contexts as well in terms of reciprocity. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that works as well. Ncarb receives all those scores from your testing and your experience record and your transcript from your education, puts that into a record and sends that to the state. In California, we have one extra step. It's called the California Supplementary Exam, the CSE. And then once you pass that, you're able to become a licensed architect and practice in the state that you're licensed. If you want to go practice in a different state, you need to get a license there. And so one of the things that Ncarb also helps with is reciprocity, so that if you get your license in California and you have a project in Iowa, you can get a license there to work there as well. You can also send the same record to Massachusetts and work there and so on. And that system of reciprocity is really important. That's one reason that these standards are so consistent from state to state. So a little bit about the AXP. What is it? It is a program formerly known as the Intern Development Program. And then after a lot of lobbying, people realized that the term intern wasn't very descriptive of what we were doing, which is really training as architects. And so it's a program about documenting architectural experience. So AXP is currently a requirement by basically all state boards. And it's a way to structure the kind of experience that you gain in an internship so that you can clearly demonstrate capability in all these different categories of tasks that architects need to be able to do. And it makes sure that you are going to be exposed to the full range of different competencies, and you can have exposure to all of those. It also is making sure that you had a certain amount of time of exposure, a certain amount of variability of kinds of exposure, and so it's quality of experience as well. And all of this is while you are out working in the world, right? So it's different from your architectural education. It's happening in your summer jobs. It's happening in the jobs that you take when you graduate. It's happening in a lot of other places in and around your education, and it can even happen kind of simultaneously to the education. So we'll talk a little bit about how that goes as well. AXP breaks down the requirements of what you have to do and document in experience into different experience areas. And they've got those broken out by the kinds of tasks that you do as you're going through work on a project. Theoretically, if you were working on a single project, you would touch all of these different aspects. You might touch on them in multiple different kinds of projects, you probably will, and you really need experience with various project types. But there's an area knowing how the practice is organized and managed, knowing how individual projects are set up and managed, knowing how to program a building and analyze a site, so sort of pre-design work. Project planning design, which is a lot like schematic design activities. Project development and documentation, which is a lot like design development and integration and construction documentation. And then the activities that we all do during construction when the building is being built. Right? And you'll see that the number of hours in each of those categories is roughly approximate to the kind of range of experiences that you need to gain in these activities. So the primary effort that we're all focused on during architectural design is the architectural design portion. And so that's the piece where you have to log the most hours, right? About, I think it's over 2/3 of the total here. But this total of 3,740 hours is the number of hours that you're required to complete. You can go beyond that. And actually, it used to be an even larger number, 5,700, I think. And some states never changed that. So like Texas, for instance, still requires more hours to be logged. So you may want to continue to log past that limit. Anyway, getting started, how do we start up an AXP exam? You're going to start an Ncarb council record. That's going to be your permanent record, and it's going to follow you around. It's the one that you will use. It's the same record once you've gotten your license, and then you add other jurisdictions and licenses to your record. It's a record of your continuing employment, and so it really tracks your entire professional career. And it's centrally housed in Washington and can be sent to any jurisdiction if you want. So you can be eligible as soon as high school graduation. So those of you who are undergrads, you can start this program right away. In fact, you could have started it the summer before your entry into university. And if that's if you actually did have something that corresponds to experience that makes sense for you to claim from that far back in the past, you could still be eligible to do it as long as that is less than 5 years in the past. So talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But eventually, your transcript does get sent to Ncarb, but it doesn't have to be sent when you start out. Right? When you graduate, you're going to forward that to Ncarb, and they'll include that on your record. So when you get started, for each experience context that you're in, whether it's a particular job or even just a short-term thing, there's going to be somebody who's going to be acting as your supervisor. Usually that's your direct report, somebody that you're working with every day. It might not always be that person if that person is a licensed architect, and so maybe there's a person who's supervising the supervisor, and they'd be the licensed architect who's signing off. If it's a context where you're working in a non-architectural context, then your supervisor, so it doesn't have to be a licensed architect, but in most cases, that's what we're looking for as an architect to help with the training. It's also a good idea to have somebody who's an outside mentor, who might be somebody that you've met through school, or could be a former teacher or colleague, or somebody who has experience but is not part of your same firm, because sometimes you have issues that come up at work and you want to talk about them with somebody who has experience, but you don't want to necessarily talk to your boss about them, right? Because there's sort of tension or conflict, or you might not want to, upset things. You might need to sit, make a career decision about changing jobs, and you can't really talk to your boss about that very easily. So in any case, that's a good kind of outside perspective to gain, and it can help you sort of gain other kinds of experience or take advantage of other opportunities sometimes, and just give you sort of feedback on where you are and what you might want to be doing. Anyway, once you've started and identified those in your experience context, you can begin to report experience. And so there are two different general settings that correspond. Basically, setting A, which is the kind of gold standard of architectural experience, where you're practicing architecture in under a U.S. licensed architect. And so that's, since this is all about architecture licensure in the U.S., That's the goal, and in fact, half of the number of hours that you need to complete is in that category, right? So 1,860, that's half of the total. You can do them all in that category, but you have to do at least half of them in that category. Then there's another category called work outside an architecture firm, and there are a bunch of categories that I'll show you that those break down into individual limits, and that includes a bunch of categories that might be related but not exactly the same. So if you're working for an engineering firm or a licensed professional, that could count. If you're working in a foreign country and you're not there's not a U.S. architect involved, you can then claim that work experience under setting O. If you're working in a construction context, like for a contractor's job site or something, you can count that under work setting O. There are a bunch of categories there. And so that's very helpful because it really allows for a lot of different kinds of experience, and it can these things that you can do sometimes even just in a short term to kind of add up. So there is a shelf life for experience. Experience is kind of good for its full value for the first 6 months. There's a reporting kind of boundary that extends that period to 8 months. So it's a sort of 2-month grace period. But basically, after that first 8-month period, you only get half credit. So if you've worked 20 hours, 9 months ago, you're only able to count 10 hours of those because you have to, each of those hours is worth a half hour. However, you are still allowed to go pretty far back for that half credit. So again, that example where you had a summer job in an architect's office after you graduated from high school, it's 2 years later, you don't have an AXP registration, but that is within that 5-year window. You can still report that experience, and so the 300 hours you did that summer, you can earn 150 of them to apply to your AXP requirement. So that's a great thing. There's also there used to be minimum durations, which they got rid of, and so now even if you have a short-term internship of a week or a weekend or something, or a kind of day of action design competition or something like that, you can count those short-term pieces as well, and so that's a big boost. There's an app called the My Axp Mobile App that's useful for tracking your record, and kind of it shows you how you're doing in each of the areas, which hours you need, which ones have been approved, which ones are in review, and which ones are remaining. It's a good idea as you work to save examples of your work as you go along, so that you will always have examples that you can show to a jurisdiction that's licensing you, or to future employers and things like that. And then you usually also, in a work context, you're going to have to keep track of your time, which projects you're working on. Sometimes it's about which tasks you're doing, but if you can keep track of what tasks you were doing and whether they correspond to these different areas, it's a great way to track it yourself and make sure you're getting the distribution that you want. And this app is very useful for kind of figuring that out as well. It's a pretty manageable fee to start. When you think you're going to have hours reliably to report, then you may want to go ahead and start your application. For students, it's only $100 to start, and that includes the first transmission of your record when you're ready to register. And the first year in the program, there's an annual $85 renewal fee after that point, which is comparable to what's required to just maintain the record kind of long term, but that's a professional investment. The best timing for this, if you're able to, is to really try to get this out of the way as soon as you can within your training, so that you can kind of cross that one off your list. The ARE exam is a lot to study for, and if you let it go a long time, it can just feel more daunting and take longer, right? Life gets very busy with your work requirements and other responsibilities, and it can be tough to fit in this study as well. So a little bit more about experience setting O. What are some of those other opportunities that you can get? That other work experience under licensed professionals, which would be, we'll talk about each of these different ones, but work abroad. design or construction-related employment, design competitions, community-based design center collaborative, construction work, site visit with mentor, which is, for example, the site visit that we took in the spring quarter to the construction site on campus, or excuse me, to the fall quarter. If you are doing a CSI certification and then professional conduct monographs or continuing education. So a little bit more about, let's say, okay, sorry, let me just talk about other work experience under licensed professionals. If this would include if you are working for an engineer or a landscape architect or something like that, a licensed professional that's not an architect. Also a licensed professional who is an architect in another country that has a different licensing. So if you were working in India or you were working in Europe, you would have experience that might qualify there. If you were working for some reason for either a U.S. company that had an office in that nation and or a just a foreign office that has a U.S. architect somehow, U.S. licensed architect somewhere on staff, that person can be your supervisor, and then those experience hours can count under setting A. So that's a nice thing as well. Design or construction related employment is where you might see something like interior design or property management or things that are design related. Sometimes if you're doing like exhibit design or something like that, where there's not a licensed architect who's supervising you, but somebody in a related area, you can get up to 320 hours in that category. So a few more example, we have design competitions that are regularly advertised. There are a bunch of things that get mailed out in the weekly roundup. There are a lot of different places you can look for those online. AIAS sponsors quite a few, as does the AIA. The Committee on the Environment has quite a few. There are a number that are based in steel. There are every year collaborations between the Ziman Center for Real Estate and Anderson students and architecture students for the urban design and housing and urban development competitions that are held. And then, of course, the solar decathlon, which Bruin Builders is doing on campus this year, is something that can also count toward the AXP credits. So all of those things are worth tracking. Let's see, the Ncarb professional monograph, counted monograph, and other continuing education. These are sort of learning units through sort of Hanleywood University or the AIA's continuing education units. USGBC has some like this. These are independent educational kind of modules that have been prepared by, in many cases, manufacturers or other institutions, and they offer them as continuing education for architects. Many of those are able to earn, essentially 1 hour per continuing education unit. So you can get quite a few of those, and they can add up to a total of 120 hours there. And those are things you can fit in around study. The site visit, like the one we took in the fall, can count toward 40 hours altogether. I think the one we did before, I was counting 2 hours for people who did that. So if you haven't signed up for those and you'd like to, I would be the supervisor for those, and Max or other executives can help put you in touch if you need. But campus construction tours, we try to set up as frequently as we can. I think the next one will probably be in the spring, depending on our pandemic timing. We'll see what happens there. That was the one in the fall quarter to the Southwest Campus Apartments, which was a great event. Construction work and community-based design is something else that, volunteering for Habitat for Humanity or through the UCLA Volunteer Center or AIAS, build day opportunities. Anything that is a kind of hands-on construction work, those things can be also applied for hours, especially where you're kind of swinging the hammer, right? Okay, so just, let's see, I think I see a couple of questions in the chat. Let me take a moment and try to answer some of those. So Charlie was asking, can you take the ARE before you have completed your XP? The answer is yes. If you do need to meet a certain eligibility threshold before you're allowed to take the ARE, and each state sets it a little bit differently. I think in California, it's the equivalent of 5 years, which includes normally the kind of either undergraduate professional or the master's professional degree as one of those. And if you don't go through a NAAB accredited degree, it takes 8 years, excuse me, 8 months. No, sorry, 8 years instead. But you can finish up your AXP hours after you've taken the ARE, or you can do this thing simultaneously. So that's a good question. Let's see other. Sorry, what else do we have? Do the design competitions need to be supervised, or can you just apply to them individually? You need to have somebody who is effectively like a mentor, who would be your supervisor, that's signing off on the hours that you do. And there is a kind of a registration criteria for design competitions. You need to tell Ncarb that you're doing that, and then you need to actually enter. So you can't sort of sign up and say, I'm going to do this, but I didn't feel like turning it in, or I didn't get all the way. So you do have to go through and submit the competition, but of course you will want to. So let's see, I think. Okay, Hayden has a question. Do working hours under foreign architecture firms with foreign licensed architects also count? Yes, those are all accountable under other opportunities. So if you're working in Japan and there was a Japanese licensed architect, that would be other opportunities. If there was someone on staff who was a US licensed architect, then it could be setting A. So it could count either way. Let's see, and let's see. Yeah, I haven't had one. What type of design employment might qualify for outside work? Industrial design, for example. That is getting a little further away. I think it's definitely design related. So you have to look at the requirement of like the specific description of that in the guidelines. I think I could see an argument for that, and depending on how much of it there was, that might work. Okay, I think I got those questions, but thanks for putting those in the chat as we go along. Okay, so I'm going to share a slightly different screen and just show you the website for, oops, so share this. This is the Ncarb website where you would land, and I'm going to put a bunch of these links in the chat at the end. But the Ncarb site basically has these different categories. Become an architect overviews the various requirements to architecture, licensure, the things that I'm going through. We'll talk about the education standard and the NAAB accredited programs, such as the master's degree here, MArch program, or at some other 5-year undergraduate institutions, a Bachelor of Architecture as well. Then there's a category for gain AXP experience, which takes you here. So this is where you would download the AXP Guidelines. That is a sort of a full description of the program and all of the individual details. The AXP Guidelines, program guidelines look like this. It's a downloadable PDF, and it has all of the specifics about what you're going to do. It defines the areas and the tasks that correspond to each one of these, the 6 experience areas, and then I think it has tabs along the way here, so you can jump to different things. And so these are the different hours, and then descriptions of those definitions that I was talking about. Here are these different opportunities. You can find out more about this. So what constitutes community-based design center collaborative? Anyway, all of this information can be gleaned from there, which is certainly very helpful. So I'm going to jump back to the main presentation. So that's more about AXP, and we can continue to talk more about that. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about the next piece of this, which is the ARE, the Architecture Record Examination. That is, currently in its 5th edition, ARE 5.0, and there are 6 computer-based divisions. They each cost, I think they still cost $235. They've been trying very hard to keep the price from going up, and so that's each one of these. Many firms, if you're employed, will reimburse you for tests that you pass. If you are interviewing in more than one place, that's a good benefit to ask for, and it's something that generally offices are very happy to help subsidize. And here was that question before. It can be started and taken entirely before completing the AXP, right? So you'll notice that these categories are really the same ones that we saw for AXP. So they are looking at the same kinds of issues. It used to be that ARE was divided up much more thoroughly into subject matter. So you might hear people talk about, oh, the structures exam or the mechanical exam or the, site design exam. And that's all from an earlier schema of the ARE, which was much more topic based. They've decided to organize this in terms of how you need to think about all these things holistically and how you have sort of different focuses on different periods. So practice management is looking much more at sort of legal aspects of practice and how things are organized, different kinds of communications that would happen. There's a lot of overlap with project management, which is much more about interactions with the owners and the contractors and the management of your team, right? So these two are shorter and are generally good ones to start with. Programming analysis, project planning and design and development and documentation start to integrate more in the way of other systems, mechanical and structural systems, especially PDD and PPD. The programming and analysis, it looks a lot at site analysis and so on. Construction and evaluation, as you can imagine, is focused on activities during construction, relationships there, closeout, what are the different phases and things like that. Again, you can start the ARE before you complete AXP. You just have to have completed 5 years of qualifying post-secondary education, which again is usually like so for the UCLA students here. The first 2 years of your undergrad program here are the first 2 years, and then the next 3 years of a 3-year master's program would be the 5 years required in California. So generally, as soon as any of you graduate, you would have satisfied that element. Some of you may be eligible because of other previous experience to do it sooner, but generally it's sort of as soon as you graduate, you'd be eligible in California. There's also something, My Examination app, that allows you to schedule and sort of track your exams, see your score reports, and there's something called the rolling clock that affects how long your results are able to stay eligible. I believe you have 5 years after you take an exam until the score needs, is no longer applicable and needs to be retaken. And so, you want to try to make sure you do it within five years. There is a famous example of a fellow who completed the entire course of 6 exams in a week. He aggressively scheduled it and studied like crazy, and then took them all and did, and passed, right? So the standard for these exams is passing. It's not whether you got a high or low score. Those scores are not shared with anybody. It's just about whether or not you have met effectively the minimum competency for practicing architecture. Yeah, if that ever happens again, please shout out. But in any case, I think so. This is what I was describing. Where did that stop off? I think yes, I think that was here. So these are the 6 areas, 6 computer-based divisions, $235 per division, and then there's the app to show that. So yeah, thank you everybody. Sorry about that. Let's look at the chat again. That'd be helpful. Okay, and thank you, Sam. I think that was good. Okay, so okay, ARE 5.0. There is another resource to look at that. Again, we have these different divisions. They match. So there's a. I'll show you the Ncarb site for that next. But there are these 6 divisions that we just mentioned. The entire exam is a multiple, well, there are different types of questions that apply. They're basically all select the right answers. There are no true false questions on the exam. Everything is a form of multiple choice, but there are cases where you have to check all that apply, right? There may be answers A, B, and C, or A and D are correct, and you want to be very careful about whether there's one or multiple answers. There are going to be hotspot types where you're going to have to hover your cursor over the right location, or you drag and place a thing into a detail. There are some quantitative fill in the blank where you have a the answer to a problem and it's open-ended and you have to infill the proper, numeric response or, text or what have you. So there are a few different question types that they use. And the best way to attack the ARE is to make a plan, to register and commit to a date that you're going to do it, and then just give yourself a deadline. And then you review and plan, and you take practice tests or flashcards, other kinds of things, and then you plan and you execute. So Ncarb has a great Pass the ARE page, and it's sort of a whole series of videos that are designed to give you exposure to each of the different question types for each of the specific divisions. There are, say, 4 or 5 basic, subcategories that each one has to cover, and you can kind of dive into each of those in detail on the ARE portions of Ncarb site. And there are videos that show you how some of those questions work, give you examples. There's a test taking strategy video that's really quite helpful. And then you can also opt to pay to have ARE scores broken down more completely. Usually you just receive, the basic registration gives you just the number and the pass or fail. You can have more detail and feedback if you would look for that. So in each of the categories on the Ncarb website, they also list the sort of specific texts that are recommended as references, sort of primary texts to study from. These are some that I teach from in professional practice, and they are on the list of things that are required, or not required, but it's just is from where the questions are drawn. And then some of the other resources that they have are they have Ncarb has an arrangement with a company called Black Spectacles, which makes online review videos and resource materials. Then there are also for-profit guides, one by PPI and one by Brightwood, and I'll show you that. Sorry, a quick question from Esteban. If the experience hours are satisfied, but it's been more than 5 years since you've worked under an architect, are you not permitted to record any of that experience? Yes, if it has been more than 5 years, you are no longer able to qualify with that experience through AXP. There is another way you might be able to claim some of it that's a little bit different. So I'll talk more about that later, but thank you. It's a good question. Under the basic AXP, that is no longer an option. Quick share here. I'm going to go back to the web. Okay, so past the ARE will take you to, it has links for available study materials. It has different videos that introduce you to the categories and how they work and so on. And then you're also able to dive into other details. So let's see. I don't know, launch that. Okay, so explore the guidelines. These are there's a document which is the same as the kind that I was just showing you for the AXP program, and this is where a lot of the detail about individual, talks about scheduling, talks about all the specifics there, but it also gives you a breakdown of so taking the ARE. Okay, so this is really all just about the guidelines for the process, and then details about more of the study materials would be many different points. So, in any case, this is a good place to focus. I'm going to try to do a new share. Here we go. This. Okay, and I'm sorry. Actually, I'm going to show you Black Spectacles as well. So some of those other resources. Here is the black spectacles material with different prep materials and a lot of videos. You can enroll in specific courses if you want, or video lectures. They have flashcards and other applications. PPI is a company that does large textbook style or flashcard or other sorts of resources. There are some free resources that they make available. And then Brightwood is the other company that does a lot of these. And they will sell individual division, or there's a big book that combines them all. They also have pretty useful flashcard options. So anyway, so those are some of those resources, and if there are follow-up questions about any of that, you're welcome to. There's also a pretty big community and blog that is established to support people as they're working on it. One of the hard things is that you're not in a school environment usually when you're studying for these, and so you have to kind of make your own community. You may have, you would love to have some other people as colleagues where you're working who are also working on this at the same time, but AIA or other groups are a great way to meet other people, and also your fellow students from AIAS. So different paths for licensure to California. Undergrads who are not getting an accredited degree. Okay, yes, I can talk a little bit more about that. So ARE, there's a Parametric test center. They have been offering it during the pandemic on an online basis, but it may, by the time you're ready to take these, still be available that way, or it may still go back to a test center. They tell you information about different pass rates. Again, the pass rates for a lot of these can be pretty modest. So a lot of people don't pass it the first time out. There's no shame in that. It's just a hard exam. And then the app is very helpful for keeping track of those things. So on to the CSE. So different paths to licensure in California. Basically, all of them require you to take the ARE. You are required to complete AXP in California. But then in terms of the other kind of pathways, if you don't, California is one of the states where you don't necessarily have to have an accredited degree to complete it, but then you do need to have more hours. And so the California Architects Board website is the place for more information about this, which is this resource. I'm going to put this in the chat at the end. But this is a place where you can find out about the specifics of California licensure. If you're coming from another country and or you have a different kind of pathway for your licensure path. The CSE is an exam a lot like the ARE. It's taken on a computer. It's focused on specifically California regulations and things that come up here quite a lot, environmental regulations. Not so much sort of seismic conditions, but more like contract and practice legal requirements and so on. Again, that was also offered in Parametric. I think that they're offering that as an online version under pandemic circumstances. But again, the requirement here is 8 years of documented post-secondary education, which is really the 5 years plus the AXP, right? That allows you, and then the ARE has to be completed. So once you've done all those things, you get to take the CSE. Once you pass that, then it's just paying a fee to California, and suddenly you're licensed. Congratulations. One important thing to know is that you can only call yourself an architect legally if you are licensed in that state. So if you are licensed in California and you are claiming to be an architect when you're in Colorado, that's not legal unless you have gone ahead and gotten a license in that state. So that's an important thing. So if you have a license in another state, is the CSE the only requirement to become licensed in California? There is something called reciprocity, right? And so that's the system whereby your license is sent by Ncarb, your record is sent by Ncarb to another jurisdiction. They evaluate that. And then if there are any additional requirements, like, so for instance, I think New York also has a bit of a test condition that's a little bit different. Texas has a longer experience requirement. So there are some different standards that apply from one place to another. There's a great site that Ncarb has, which allows you to go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, just hover over the state and you can see their requirements and you compare how those requirements work. So if you're coming from some other foreign context, you may have a slightly different path of applies, but a lot of the same factors. Generally, one of the biggest tricks is that the degree that you'd have from a foreign university would not necessarily correspond to the US degree, primarily in these areas of practice management and project management, where it's sort of legal factors about the context of building codes in the US and other kinds of things that might be different wherever you're coming from. And so those need to be kind of filled in. There's a formal evaluation called the Education Evaluation Services, ESA for architects, and they compare another degree to the standard for the US. If, as was an example was asked about earlier, if you have a lot of experience that goes back too far to be covered by the regular AXP, you can look for something called a portfolio review, right? So you need to still get a minimum of 1 year working in an architect's office under AXP setting A. But if you have a portfolio that can demonstrate the quality of your previous work to the satisfaction of the reviewer, then you may be able to go around that portion of it. And so I can have that queued up in another location. Basically, all candidates still must pass the ARE. I mean, it's an interesting situation. You can have people who have been practicing, in another country for years, have a very distinguished career, but then they still need to come here and get a license and kind of complete the equivalent of AXP, demonstrate that they're completing that, and still take the ARE exam, right? Everybody has to sit for that. So that's one reason why if people are practicing from somewhere else, they usually want to partner with somebody locally. But if you're relocating here and you're going to be here permanently, you need to kind of go through this this effort here. So let me just show you. I think I have that AXP portfolio. That's another page on this site, and it's designed again for unlicensed individuals who need to show their experience component, and it's sort of situation where you have experience that might be older than 5 years or other circumstances that need to apply. And then if you are an doing international practice, there are various agreements of reciprocity, not with Canada particularly, but also now with Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand. There are some other analogies in the Asia Pacific region or Europe to some degree as well, where things are recognized, and there are definitely different international standards, all of which have analogies, and so those are important things to be aware of. And then finally, the certificate portfolio is another educational alternative. So those two things in response to those questions that were there earlier. Then we'll go back to the presentation, and then we're closing in on the hour. So back to the presentation. Okay. So some other things career-wise that are coming up that you want to just plan for. I think it's going to end up being virtually, but we are planning Career Day for February 25th. There's also going to be a work portfolio workshop that is anticipated, and we'll be finding out more about that. Other career opportunities for the summer or even part-time work while you're enrolled can be found sometimes through AIA Los Angeles or other locations. AIA Pasadena Foothill has recently reached out to us. There's AIA in Orange County, in San Fernando Valley, other places. And students are eligible to join for free, also new grads. And that's really something to take advantage of. So there's some great events locally that you can attend. They have wonderful emerging professional programs and a great network that you can tap into when you're out. And then, of course, AIAS is one of those, which is also great support for that. NOMA also has a career center along the same lines, and build at jobnoma.net. USGBC LA has a green talent portal, which is a kind of wider category than just architecture, but a lot of design opportunities there. And then there are also opportunities to be found for volunteering or through the UCLA Career Center listings. And then Library Research Guide has more information about all these topics as well. And you can also contact me if I can help with that. UCLA AUD tries to advertise in the weekly roundup internships, scholarships, competitions, things that we receive information about, and we try to just forward that out to you. We do a little bit of screening, but it's not anything that we've initiated. It's really much more of sort of filtering that here's what's out in the marketplace to check out. When you're preparing for careers and looking for a job search, you want to try to see what's current. You want to leverage your network and cast a wide net to look at different kinds of opportunities in architecture. You might be able to work in a great firm, but in a sort of a more supplementary role because you're starting out, or you might be able to work at a small firm and do all sorts of things. Very different options. There are remote opportunities in a lot of firms these days that are also interesting. And it's always good to follow up. Make sure you're applying to a particular contact when you're applying and follow up. There's UCLA Extension has a career workshop that they run remotely, and they can offer tips on cover letter, resume writing, online interviewing, a lot of other kinds of things. So check that out. Periodically, Leading Green will host Lead Green Associate trainings here on campus, usually coordinated with the department. And ARE's got a number of webinars that they'll offer through their YouTube channel. So that's another way if you're thinking about ARE, you can find out more about it that way. UCLA's Community Service Commission is focused on different kinds of opportunities. A lot of these are kind of campus opportunities. They are much more design related than architecture per se, but they can be great ways to kind of supplement your activity when you're on campus. A lot of students have gone to work with design and project management when there's an option working on campus projects, also for facilities or UCLA's rental properties or housing and hospitality services. USGBC LA has a Green Building Corps, which I think they will have another round of interviews for in the spring. We had a number of undergrads participate in that from architecture contexts, but also environmental studies majors. And I'm going to be heading up a process called Lead Lab, which happened last year and is going to be gearing up again for the spring. So stay tuned for more information about that. And certainly AIAS is a great resource, and many of the others. So I think I am just about out of time. So that's my contact information. I'm going to put into the chat links for all of the things that I presented today. And then I know many of you have to go to class, but I will share that. And then I think this will be recorded, and I'll stick around after the presentation if anybody has particular questions, but can I help with any questions now?
Thanks, Todd. This was great. I have one quick question. So when looking around for jobs for the summer and then beyond graduation, when trying to negotiate what work you want to do to kind of fill in these buckets, do you have any, or I guess a couple of questions. One is, how receptive are firms to kind of specifying kind of the areas that you want to be working in? And two, do you have any recommendations for kind of negotiating that?
So in my experience, most firms are pretty enthusiastic when somebody says, I want to try to work toward licensure, right? The more licensed architects you have on staff, the better capability everyone has, and the more kinds of things they can be assigned to. It shows that somebody is really willing to take a lot of things on. I think I would probably talk more about, the variety of things that you are doing or not doing probably once you have a job a little bit more, but that's the kind of thing that you can easily say, given the way that AXP is organized now, most jobs have some exposure to almost all of these things. Sometimes people have a harder time getting construction site experience or getting sort of project management and meeting types of experience. But even in those cases, you can say, hey, is it possible for me to spend a couple of hours going to the job site, or can I sit in on these meetings? If if it's a meeting that you don't really have a reason to be at, but you could take notes, like that's a really important function, because it's one of the things people always have to do. And then you can be a fly on the wall and hear about all these other interesting things. And so that's a really useful way to do it. But in general, I think the more that you sort of step up and sort of take ownership of your training, you say, I am really excited about these things that I've been doing, but these are some other things I really want to do. And you can even show them, here's how far I am on my AXP, and I've got this far to go, and can you help me sort of get some of these construction things? Because they might even have other ideas outside the firm that they can help with, or stuff like that. So in general, I think you want to try to treat your employer as a partner in this. They definitely should be, and I think that can work really well to your advantage. It's the kind of thing you can bring up in a performance review, or it's the kind of thing you can bring up informally. It all depends on how things are structured where you're working. Good question. Any other questions I can help with? I think, yes, I know studio is getting started. So let's see. Okay, Noma, if you become licensed in California, for example, you have to reapply for licensure if you relocate to another state. Yes, that's true. So, however, it's not the same amount of trouble every other time. So basically, once you've got a license in one state, you can get reciprocity in another state. And from California, which has some of the strictest standards, it's easy to go in the other direction, right? Going to Arizona, where there are fewer standards, is not a challenge, right? If you were to be practicing in Arizona and want to come to California, then you would have to pass the CSE. So that can be the case in some cases. I've had students who graduated, licensed in California, they're moving to New York, they have to take another, it's not an exam, but there's another kind of evaluation piece that they have to do there. There was like an interview portion in Seattle, in Washington. Different states have their different standards. Ncarb worked very hard to try to make those consistent, but each one has their own, approach. So, Chloe, I was wondering, where's a good place to look for internships for undergrads? I've seen internships are interested in students that have a higher level experience. Well, so I think it really kind of depends. I would cast a wide net. I would try to go after things that you find interesting, and there are lots of ways to get involved early. I think it's a good time to be interviewing, because I think that people are hiring pretty well. There's still a lot that people are looking for. So I think the other case is that you can try to find part-time conditions at something on campus, or part-time in a nearby office is another way to do it. If you have another opportunity that might not be with an architect's office, but is local, or even volunteering, a lot of those different kinds of things can work. But I would check the job boards. I would come to the career day and just see what's out there. There are positions that might be much more entry level, but if you have a good portfolio and you're a good worker, there's a lot of stuff that is about practice that isn't necessarily about how much design you've done or how developed your portfolio is. There's a lot that's just about the process, and really just if you are a person who's able to lead, who's able to manage your time and be productive, you can learn a lot on the job and also be really contributing. So. Okay, Esteban, does experience have to be verified by an employer, or can it be verified by a colleague or employee who's licensed off of that? So in setting A, it has to be your supervisor who's associated with the firm, right? So you say, and the way that works is, you're employed, you record your hours, you submit them to Ncarb. Ncarb sends an email to the person you've identified as supervisor saying, Esteban has asked for you to be a supervisor. They say, yes, I will. And then the experience gets sent through and they say, yes, those are the number of hours that correspond to what was done. So, so it does need to be somebody who's there. The only case where it would be somebody outside of the employment relationship, the idea is it's somebody who has control over your work, right? Responsible control over your work. If it's not the the person you're working for, then it would be in a like a design competition or one of those setting O categories where it's somebody who's in a kind of mentorship supervising relationship. They're not assigning the work that you're doing per se, but they're keeping track of what you're doing and to vouch that you've done it, right? So volunteer activities like for a habitat build day or something, usually not an architect, but the person who's heading that up, who knows if you were there for 8 hours, right? That kind of thing. Okay, great questions, everybody. Okay, I think everybody's got to go. Have a great studio. Have a great weekend. Good to see everybody. Thanks for coming, and watch out for more events from AIAS. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next week.
Take care.